Okay, now we started our business design workshop segment. I'm gonna hand it over to Hisham so he can properly introduce Everton Impact Signal. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Alexis. And now we'll be introducing Everton Lewis, partner at Impact Signal, to lead us in the business design workshop. For those of you who are not aware of Impact Signal, they do some amazing work when it comes to innovating service experiences. And they are the experts when it comes to operating at the intersection of analytics and a human-centered approach. Mr. Everton, you can go ahead and I'll let you kick it off the workshop.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Hisham. So a couple of things I just wanted to share with you that you won't be able to find on my bio if you go to LinkedIn and try to learn a little bit about me. So the first thing is that I'm an accidental consultant. So I did not have this career in mind when I went to business school. It was something that I stumbled upon as I was going through business school. I saw it as an opportunity, to do a lot of the things that I was really enjoying. So I started at IBM, then I went to another boutique consultancy, and then now I'm running my own consultancy with a couple of partners. So my background is more on the service design, experience design, and I've got a couple of partners who have masters in statistics and have done a bunch of work with Loyalty One and other great companies like that, who have that experience that we bring to clients. So I've enjoyed myself as a consultant, over 100 engagements over the last, and I was thinking about it the other day, it's almost 20 years. Time goes by really quickly. And, I really enjoy the idea of taking diverse thinking, diverse teams, bringing them together to solve problems. So I've had the pleasure of working with data scientists, working with interaction designers, visual communication designers, biomedical communicators, just a variety of people with a variety of skills and training and bringing them together to solve problems. Outside of work, I'm an avid soccer player. I enjoy playing soccer as well as watching. So for anyone who is watching on the weekend, Liverpool definitely did a great job in terms of 5-0 over one of their arch rivals. So anyone who's into sports will know that that's a big deal. And those are the types of things that I like to do. I like to make sure that I'm enjoying myself outside of work as well as inside of work. So connect with me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect, answer more questions, anything that doesn't come up today that you want to have a conversation around, please feel free. So a couple of weeks ago, I was asked by a couple of people that I know at Rotman if I would be interested in participating. I said, yeah, this is great. This is something I can definitely lend my time to, as well as share some thoughts that I think will be helpful for the team. Specifically, they asked me if I could share some thoughts on how can bringing the human perspective really help with this challenge that you have, this case study. So, what I'll try to do today is I'll share with you some of my thoughts in terms of what you need to think about as you go forward with the case study. And the other thing that I really want to encourage you as you go forward is I want you to take this as an opportunity to learn. So I remember I was in your shoes, I did a 2-year MBA, spent time doing a bunch of different case studies in finance and management science and all these different areas. And so really take the time to learn, push yourself to learn new things, try new things. It's great if you win, but make sure that you're learning through this. The other piece is work with the team, right? So it's really an opportunity to, work on that teamwork aspect. How do you really take advantage of all of the knowledge and all of the skills that the different team members are bringing? Because if you can do that, you will end up with new and interesting solutions. And that is something that you really want to make sure that you're honing your skill on as you go into the business world. So just want to encourage you with those two things. So I guess at this point, maybe I'll just start to share some of my thoughts and perspectives. So the first thing that I want to do is I just want to, share a couple of headlines, and I want us to just think about, how the human perspective could have helped with these specific issues. So the first one, okay, that worked. So failure with algorithm users. Dear tech companies, I don't want to see pregnancy ads after my child was stillborn. Strong headline. This is pulled from the Washington Post. This is something that was out in the world and people were reacting to. So when you read this headline, what do you think? How do you feel? Do we think that this could have been avoided? If it could have been avoided, how? One headline. Next headline. Ruthless quotas at Amazon are maiming employees. This holiday season, Amazon will move millions of packages at dizzying speed, and internal injury reports suggest that all that convenience is coming at the expense of worker safety. Another headline, pulled from a newspaper. This is a national newspaper. How does it make you feel when you hear that? Do you have a specific reaction to that company based on that headline? Is it impacting the way you think of that organization? This is another headline that I just wanted to pull for us to think about. So I've been asked to share today, how can taking a more human-centric approach help us with the challenge that you have? And what I would say to you is that what we need to do is we need to think deeper about the people, not just the data. So we need to answer questions about people that are difficult to measure, but are important for success. So some of the things that companies have realized that are important for success is they need to understand how they can engage customers. They need to understand how to build trust with customers. They need to understand how to create attachments. So this is where we start to think about loyalty, right? In terms of attachment, connection, growth, community, personal alignment with an organization. And these things are difficult to measure, but they're important to success. If you can create these things, you will have more success in your business. And I think that that's the opportunity with being more human-centric, to actually really dive and start to think at scale, how do we create these things? What are the things that we can do differently as an organization that will have an impact? So now coming back to your case study. So, and I didn't really get a chance to go through and understand the case study in advance of this presentation, but what I understand is that you're gonna have to select customers to contact and invite to an event. So initially I understood that you'd have a data set and you'd have to think about that data set. And you have to think about, how can you minimize churn? So looking at your problem, thinking about that general statement about churn and understanding churn, I think that there's a couple of key questions that you need to really be able to answer to get to a solid answer for Rogers. The first thing is why? Why are people leaving? The next question is when? When do you need to target the people to avoid churn? And then the final question I think that you need to really think about is who? Who do you need to target to avoid churn? So we're going to walk through these questions in a bit more detail and start to think about some of the tools and techniques that you can use as you start to think about your answers to these questions. But before we do that, because I know you've been listening to us talk quite a bit, I want to ask you a question and I want you to react and give me your responses to this question. So the first question that I have for you is, can you define one hypothesis you have about the reason that customers are churning? Something that you'd like to explore in your data set. And can you just share your thoughts in the chat?
Okay, so Patrick says we could have simply gotten a better promotional offer. We also have people saying better value plans for new players, better offer from competition. Broke students cannot afford Canadian prices anymore, better pricing, services somewhere else. Because they're being offered an incentive to leave by Bell, better dealer competitors, lower prices, and too many hidden costs. These are some of the comments.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. And what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at your responses to just understand if any of these reasons are emotional, because there potentially can be emotional reasons why people are leaving, as well as what I refer to as functional reasons. So maybe they had a bad experience and that's now leading them to a point where they now are looking to churn, to leave the organization. So I'm just encouraging you that as you start to think about reasons, there's things that are very, what I refer to as functional, and then there's things that are, more emotional. So start to think about those things and try to understand those things as you go forward and you tackle this challenge. So let's get into understanding the why in a bit more detail. So there's lots of different customer information. You've got the data set. I don't know what's in the data set, but I'm sure there's gonna be lots of interesting information that you can tackle. So some of the things that we think about in Impact Signal as we think about customer information, we think about physical, So things like displays, interactions, this is information about what's happening that we would like to know and understand. There's things that are in the virtual, so email, web, app, different things that are happening related to the customer that we want to try and understand. There's specifics around transactions, so type, location, SKUs, that's all information that we want to try and collect and understand. And then there's also contextual information that we think is very important for us to understand. So what's happening in the market, what's happening in the experience, and what specifically are the emotions that are being elicited in our customers. And as we start to think deeper in terms of that contextual information, that really helps us to understand why, we need to really think about attitudes, behaviors, and mindsets. So attitudes are feelings that you have toward a brand, a product, an interface, or an experience. Behaviors are what users do, and we try to understand that through observation, as well as you can collect that information through looking at the data sets. And finally, the last thing here is mindsets. What are the underlying beliefs and assumptions that are actually leading people to different behaviors and making different choices? And as we start to think about getting even deeper in terms of understanding our customers, there's a variety of things that can impact outcomes for telco customers. So we've got what we refer to as external factors. So, there's a new iPhone launch and that has an impact. Maybe there's something related to the work systems and compatibility. We can also think about preventable versus unpreventable. So moving to a new country versus a bad customer experience. And lastly, there's a piece around motivations. So we know that some people are motivated by deals, some people are motivated by service. So we need to try and understand that as we're starting to think deeper about our customers. And how can we pull that type of knowledge from our data sets when available, but when not available, where can we get that type of information and get that type of understanding that helps us interpret what we're seeing, interpret the different patterns that are coming up. So as you start to think about researching the why, we start to think about user research, and not all the answers are going to be readily apparent in your data set. Sometimes you're going to need to research your users to add important context around what's happening and to really get that deeper understanding. And you should start to think about different sources for this type of information. So we want to try and understand our customers. So sometimes there's customer research that's available. It can be primary or secondary sources for that information. There's also employee research, talking to employees, understanding what they know, what they've learned. That's also something that is going to be important and can be helpful. And again, there's primary and secondary sources that you can rely on for that. So as you start to think about why and really answering that question about why are people churning, try to dig deeper. And as you're trying to dig deeper, start to think about different sources of information that you can use to get that understanding. Now, the next piece that we want to actually work through is we want to start to think about when. So now, knowing that your specific case here is that you actually have a very specific moment of when you're going to contact them. So you're going to contact them to invite them to an event. But that's not always the case. Sometimes as you're building these models, you actually have to think about when you're going to contact them. And you have to think about that within the context of a journey for a customer. So customers take specific paths through the life cycle with a company. And there's key moments tend to be either emotional peaks in the journey, or they actually tend to be the end of the journey. If you think about your experience, so maybe think back to when you applied to an MBA. You probably remember parts of it, but you don't remember all of the different moments. But you will remember either moments that are highly emotional on a positive or highly emotional on a negative, as well as generally the end, that if you're successful, that's a nice moment and you'll remember that. So keep that in mind in terms of, as you think about customers and you think about them in context of a company, that they're going through a journey. And it's really important for us to start to think about, as we build models in general, when are the right moments for us to contact them? The other thing to keep in mind as well is that certain experiences have bigger impact than others. So there's something that that is written, and it's called the power of moments. So sometimes people talk about this as creating delighters. And if you can create a delightful moment for a customer that can actually create a lot of resistance to any of the negative impacts that can happen, in the future related to the experience, because that's an extraordinary moment, and that tends to really be a resistor to any other negative things that happen. So customer journeys, again, specific paths, there's a life cycle. The other thing to keep in mind is that loyalty is created over time. As you think about customers, there's service, there's support, there's care, there's all of these, there's rewards, all of these things start to create loyalty over time. So I'm not sure if this information is going to be available, but what we want to do is we want to try and, as much as possible, understand the overall experience. Because if we have a lot of these positive experiences that are creating loyalty, then that is something that's going to reduce the potential of churn for customers. So is that information available? If it is available, what can we glean from those different touch points, and to understand if we have a loyal customer or if we don't have a loyal customer. So at this point, I'd like to do another activity with you. And again, I want to try to just encourage you to start thinking about some of these things. So one of the things that we just started talking about is when, right? As you start to think about when is the right time to reach out to customers, I'd like you to just answer this question. What are the risks to reaching out to a customer 30 days before the end of a service contract? And can you share your thoughts in the chat? And Alexis, I'm not sure who was reading before, but if I could have someone just reading some of this out, that would be really helpful.
Absolutely, happy to. So people are saying that they may have already made their mind to leave the company, so that might be too late. What else? We see maybe you reach out to a customer who was not intended to churn. You could cause the customer to reflect critically on their service and contemplate switching. The customer may have already decided to leave, and maybe they're worried about getting stuck in the contract after renewal. These are some of the comments we have.
Great. So one of the things that I want to just comment on a little bit more is that, the idea that maybe someone wasn't thinking about leaving, but now you've got them thinking about leaving. So that's something that we want to be aware of as much as possible in terms of you might have positive impacts of reaching out to someone, but there could potentially be negative impacts. So anytime we create an action, we always want to think about the positive and the negative of those actions and start to think about ways maybe that we can mitigate those actions going forward. And part of that is understanding an attitude, a behavior, and mindset that can help us think through that. Okay. All right. Now let's go into the last piece here in terms of understanding the who. So as we start to, we talked about why, we talked about when, and now the last piece here is understanding the who. So who specifically do we need to target? And we want to try and create a picture of that person or that target group. And sometimes we use what we refer to as profiles. And profiles can define important differences in groups of users that can impact how they might behave. So targeting the right audience is important. And behaviors of different groups can have negative impact or a positive impact on the business. And we need to make sure that we're aware of both. So specifically here, I just put some thoughts down here around some groups. So I've got some labels. The first one is influential advocates. So you can think of those people as individuals that are going to be posting, going to be sharing, going to be talking a lot about their experiences. So think about interacting with this group and think about what could be a negative impact or a positive impact of an interaction that you plan for this group. Now, some people will say, hey, if you reach out to influential advocates and they have a great experience, then they're going to be talking about it, and that's going to be a positive for your company. The other piece is that if they have a negative influence or a negative experience, they're also going to be talking about it, and that could have a negative impact on your company. So if you know that you've got a group like that, really thinking about how you interact with them and how you can create a positive experience to make sure that we have that impact that we want. Another piece that we can think about on this is the passive consumers. So these are people who don't talk very much. They don't reach out to the organization very often. So they're opposite of the influential advocates. And think about that group. We can have positive and a negative for that group in terms of when we interact with them. So a piece of it here is that we might not know exactly what they're thinking, right? So they're not giving us a lot of cues. So we may reach out to them in a way that is not helpful. And so we need to try and get information so we can understand as much as possible to create the right interaction. So these are a couple of groups here. We've got another one here, the resource vacuum. So the resource vacuum is a group that really is soaking up a lot of expensive resources from the organization. So specifically, you can think of the call center, someone who calls a lot to the call center. We know that that is a lot more expensive versus someone who actually goes to the web and tries to find out information on their own. So if you're interacting with this resource vacuum and kind of grouping, and then now you're actually getting them to call you more and do more things, that's actually a negative impact for the company. But if you could do something that can actually, lead them away from maybe those higher cost channels, that would actually be a positive. So starting to think about the behaviors of those different groups, what would be ideal for the organization, ideal for the individual, and then start to think about what would be the right interactions. So that's where we start to get a bit more human-centric in terms of our thinking and approach. Okay, so now just to bring those three things together for our presentation, it's really important that we can make informed decisions. You need to have qualitative and quantitative information to make decisions. So you need to think, why are people leaving? There may be things that you can describe from a qualitative perspective as well as things that you can describe from a quantitative perspective. You need to think about when to target people to avoid churn. You need to think about who to target and who are the right people to target to avoid churn. And these decisions are generally made better when you use both the qualitative aspect and the quantitative aspect to describe and understand. So, as we start to think about qualities, there's lots of information here that we can think about in terms of helping people feel valued, and what are the types of things that we can do to create that. How do we build trust? How do we create engagement? These are things that are important for us to understand and are important for us to start to build to help for the future. A couple other things that I just wanted to share with you in terms of as you start to think about the challenge is you need to start to think about how you can go beyond the numbers. So, there's a resource here. This was actually written by Roger Martin, who used to be a dean at Rotman. And he really, kind of believes in the philosophy that, quantitative models aren't enough. We need to actually complement and make sure that we have a deeper understanding of some of these other things that are important for customers for when they make decisions, as well as businesses when they're going to make decisions. And another thing here is the guidelines for human AI interaction. And I think that this resource specifically is very good in terms of starting to think about, as you're building algorithms, as you're building models, starting to think about things that are important in terms of if it goes wrong, what do we do? How do we engage customers to give them options? So remember at the beginning, we talked about that example with those ads that were being displayed to someone who had actually miscarried. So are there ways for us to use cues to actually turn off advertisements so that, whatever we use to target that person, are there other things that we can start to build in that can be cues to actually turn off that type of advertisement so that we're not creating that feeling and that emotional negative feeling. So, and there's a few other different guidelines that are important in that document that I think are helpful as you start to think about, in the context of a business and creating human AI interactions. And again, I encourage everyone here to really use this as an opportunity to learn. And part of that is extending. So starting to think, on the analytics piece, what can I learn with SaaS and the team and all the software, but as well as we start to think about how we can talk about the target groups, start to think about some of these design resources that can be important. So there's a few here that I've listed, and it's all around how do we start to think about answering those questions? How do we actually present the information that's important so that businesses can make decisions that are based on, yes, calculations, yes, inputs and outputs from a formula, but as well some of these other human-centric dimensions that are important so that you can make decisions for the best of the business and for the customers. Okay, so that's the content that I wanted to share with you today. Happy to take any questions, happy to talk more about any of these elements.
We don't have any questions at this point, but I do encourage students to reach out to you directly on LinkedIn, maybe connect. And we do have one person asking if the deck will be available. Everton, am I right to understand we're able to send this deck out to the students?
Yes, yes, we can. What I'll do is I'll send you a copy of the updated one. So I think you have one from earlier today, so you can send that out with which has some updated resources.
Sounds amazing. So if we don't have any more questions, Everton, I want to say thank you. That was a wonderful session. I'll hand back to Alexis to wrap up. And yeah.
So once again, thank you, Mark and Lindsay from SAS and all the SAS folks that joined us here on the call. We are really grateful for this partnership that has been going on with Rotman and Arbeck for so long. We are really looking forward to this challenge. And thank you also, Everton, for presenting this amazing workshop. And I would like to thank also our partners here, the Business Design Club and Roma, for helping putting us together this event. And I mean, the games are on, and I'm looking forward to seeing all your submissions. And I see you guys during the office hours and on November 10th for the finals and the networking event. Okay. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good luck, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good luck. See you soon.